Hi, I'm Bobby Lee.
And I'm Kaylin.
And we're from Hurricane Creek Farms. Today we're going to do a little different video than what we normally do on our channel. More of an informational sharing episode going into our Stalker operation, specifically how we did in 2020, kind of putting the pencil to it and showing you how the math works out. And then at the end, maybe discussing some of the day-to-day different things we do and how that works out. But as always, we remind you to hit the like and subscribe button. And from there, we'll dive right in. All right, so as we mentioned, we want to use this video to share some information specifically regarding our 2020 Stalker operation, how the math works out and behind all our finances, but also go into more of some of the day-to-day details, more towards the end of how we make it work specifically for our operation. Obviously, every operation is a little different, but maybe for somebody in the Southeast, similar conditions to what we deal with, can use something that can help them. Obviously, very small sample size, 1 year, one truckload of cattle, essentially 71 head. So keep that in mind. We will kind of compare and contrast this to last year and how we did better in some areas, worse in others. And also the disclaimer that we're not experts. We're learning a lot, learning more every year, every day even. But kind of as we get into that, keep that in mind. We get lots of questions about this, and so just wanted to share it with everybody. And so,
well, before you get into too much detail, how about you tell us a little bit more about what Stalker operation is?
Right, good question. So, yeah, if you're watching this video, you may know what Stalker cattle are, you may not. And so, essentially, kind of the middle man of the beef cattle production. So, between the cow-calf and feedlot operation. So, of course, cow-calf. Guy or gal has a herd of cows, usually a bull, maybe they're artificially inseminating. Either way, they're breeding, they're calving, they're growing those calves out to weaning. Once those calves are weaned, they then typically move on to the Stalker phase. They're selling them mostly through a local livestock market. And that's where we're obtaining our calves anyway. Stalker buys them. Essentially, we graze them out, and in our situation, from 500 to 600 pounds up to 800 to 900 pounds. And then we sell them where they move on to the feedlot, where they're then fed to finish, and then end up being processed and turned into beef. Okay, so to specifically just look at the numbers, say we purchased 71 head, spent a total of $51,569. They averaged 573 pounds. I think that comes out to right at $1.26, $1.27 a pound. And just immediately, that was pretty cheap. We were tickled to be able to buy them at that price. We were buying back in, of course, March and April when the world, was coming to an end. In a lot of people's minds, the markets were really out of whack. Created some challenge in terms of just obtaining that number of cattle. A lot of the livestock markets, specifically the one we buy through, the auction we buy through, normally selling 1,000 to 1,200 head a week, was only, I think they were only having, maybe 400 or 500 head. So a lot less numbers being sold, and for good reason. You kind of feel for those producers that were needing or having to sell at that time, but it did benefit us. To compare to 2019, we bought essentially the exact same type of animals, within just a couple of pounds, that same size. We paid like $1.58 a pound, which 31 cents a pound difference. So paid a lot more per head last year. So that we started off in a lot better shape just in terms of total investment we had to make to buy these calves. Then our second expense there, $2,840 category we just labeled as veterinary. So that was a lot of money we spent within the first 24 to 48 hours we had bought them. Vaccines, antibiotics, fly tags, deworming, implants, those sorts of things. That comes out to about $40 a head. And won't get into too many of the details of the exact vaccines and whatnot we use. We have some previous videos that go into that, but $40 a head roughly on veterinary health care. $3,550 on feed. Comes out to right at $50 a head. We don't feed them much. We're essentially, growing these calves just on grass. So we feed about 50 pounds per head, 50 pounds total a day, less than a pound per head. Just enough to keep them calm, coming to a feed bump, easy to move them when we're ready to rotate pastures, or if we need to catch one to treat a sick one, anything like that. $1,600 on mineral, and you could have put feed and mineral together. We've got them broken down separately there, about $22 or so a head. $1,560 on fertilizer. We do really focus, on pasture management, growing as much good quality and quantity of forage as we can. We'll discuss that a little more later on in the video, but again, right at $22 or so a head. So for total, expenses of $61,121. Then when we sold them, sold 66 head, which obviously you see there's 5 head missing there. It was essentially our death loss, which that is far too many. That comes out, 5 out of 71 is right at 7%. So a pretty generally unacceptable death rate of, at 7%.
So what would you consider an appropriate, mortality or death rate?
Okay, so good question. Generally, for most stocker operations, you're going to see more like 2 or 3%. So we were, 3 times that roughly. And again, we'll discuss a little more, later in the video why we think that may have been, what we possibly can do to improve on that. But and in that 5 head that we lost, 4 were true death loss. They got sick. We treated them, despite our efforts, they died. 1 tested BVD positive. We do BVD test all of them, had just 1 positive. Fortunately, we had a kill date already booked with one of our local processors, so he wasn't really a total loss. He's in our freezer now. We ate a little of him just a couple of nights ago. So for the purposes of our finances and whatnot, we consider him a total loss, but we did at least get to salvage him in some way. But so a total profit of $10,776, and that comes out to $1.51 a head if you calculate it on the total head we had purchased. To get into a little more, they averaged 573 pounds when we purchased them, sold them at 841 pounds. That's right at 270 pounds, 268 pounds, if I can do the quick math correctly. We had them, I think on average, because we bought them on several different days, 234 days. Comes out to, I think, an average daily gain of right at 1.15 pounds. Initially I hear that, or I think about that number, I'm like, man, that's not that great. But when you really look into it, you've got calves that are growing just on grass or forages, they're grazing, very little supplementation with feed. That's a pretty typical rate of gain. I say that number for our feed cost was us feeding a total of about 50 pounds per day. We bumped that up, as we got closer to the end. We sold these calves week before Thanksgiving, so pastures here again in West Tennessee and Southeast are starting to get a little short, especially after we got a frost right around the 1st of November. But pretty minimal feed that we're supplementing them with. So that rate of gain is something we're comfortable with doing what we're doing. Okay, and so we've gone through kind of some of the finances, but now discussing more the day-to-day or week-to-week kind of management decisions and how we go about things to help us get from point A to point B. And so we really consider ourselves grass farmers first, cattlemen second. Here in the Southeast, we're blessed we get lots of rainfall. I think our area averages 55 to 60 inches a year. Like the last couple of years, we've gotten well over that. And so we can grow, pretty good quality forage and a lot of it. We specifically, our operation, we're really not in a big cattle producing area, but we have focused on the farms we have purchased. For row crop purposes would be considered, inappropriate or very marginal acres, a lot of rough hill ground, but it, grows good grass. It's very suitable for grazing. And so using that ground we have, good Lord blessing us with sunshine and rain, growing grass, and then really just using these animals to convert that crop that we're growing into something that's marketable and useful, in forms of providing quality, high protein, nutritious product for the consumer. But we, as far as our pasture management, again, this part of the country, we can be, pretty intense, with our stocking rate and doing things like soil testing, fertilizing to make sure that we, maximize what we can have on the available pasture.
So tell us a little bit more about your stocking rate and rotating the pastures.
Right. So, in this part of the country, we can graze animals this size, roughly 600 pounds we're buying them, at about 1 per acre. That may seem a little aggressive, but other operations may not be as aggressive with the fertilizing or with the rotation on the grazing and run a few less head, and you can certainly make that work, maybe have a little less inputs, but it works really well for us. We've been blessed with good rainfall the last few years. Had it gotten dry, would we have run into a problem with pastures getting a little short? Maybe. But the last couple of years, we've been really happy with pastures holding up really well. We do rotate. We probably every 7 to 10 days, just depending on the exact conditions, at the time, making sure they're not grazing it back too short. They're always ready to move to the next pasture. Old saying, grass is always greener on the other side. So having them, trained to come to a feed bucket certainly makes that a little easier too. But certainly that's one of the things we do. And as you get into, this specifically works really well for where we're located. In other parts of the country, obviously, where a lot of times they're limited by the amount of rainfall they get, they may not stock nearly that densely. And it works for them. They can, they may have a lot more acres available to them, but just grazing at a much less dense stocking rate. The other thing you need is really focus on, having adequate fencing. There's no such thing, in my opinion, of having, too good of fences or worrying too much about it. We're buying these calves through livestock auctions. We don't know much, if anything, about them when we get them. You don't know how much they've been handled, if they've been weaned, or how long in many cases. And so the last thing we want to worry about or have happen is them getting out. So having good fences and good quality pasture forages for them to graze is very important. Again, then just, procuring the cattle, buying them. How do we get our hands on them? We go through local auctions. If we had, local producers that we could buy them directly off the farm, that would be something I would be interested in, would even pay a premium, for them calves not having gone through a livestock market where they're exposed to a lot of potential illness, knowing exactly what type of, vaccination plan, how long they've been weaned before we get our hands on them. But not as feasible in our area, just, for us wanting a very specific animal, very uniform, all males. So go through a livestock auction. We use an order buyer. This year we did buy a few ourselves at one of the smaller local auctions, but for the most part buying, using an order buyer. People not familiar maybe with that term. kind of, as the name implies, somebody that either works at the local, sale barn, or, is a contact that and does those sorts of things. You can typically call your local livestock auction and there'll be somebody there, or they can put you in touch with somebody who can do order buying. Obviously having, somebody there you trust is key, and we are fortunate that we, know some people, or have gotten to know some people that we can trust and do a good job of buying cattle for us. Again, kind of as we discussed earlier, as soon as we get them, pretty much within just the first few days, we're working them. We're running them through a cattle chute. We're giving them vaccines. We're deworming them. We're implanting them. If they're still bulls, we're castrating with the band. Again, we have some previous videos that go a little more into detail there, so won't discuss that too much. We've kind of hit on, we feed them a little each day, keep them calm, keep them easy to catch. Mineral always available to them. We do check them every day. I know some people, don't necessarily do that. To me, it sounds like common sense. To a lot of you, it may as well. Some people check theirs 3 or 4 times a week and they make it work. I enjoy being out there, just checking them every morning, getting out there early when it's still cool, just seeing them out there, listening to them graze. It's kind of therapeutic for me, but, certainly do that too, just because it gives us peace of mind. If there's anything sick, you're going to catch it quicker if you're seeing them every day. Just make sure they haven't gotten out overnight, anything like that.
All right, so why don't you talk a little bit more about the weed control?
Okay, so yeah, controlling weeds in the pasture, because certainly that is a reality. And so we don't, or at least we have not yet used any herbicide control on these specific pastures where we're running these stalkers, and we really don't want to. And I guess to something we hadn't really hit on is kind of the diversity of our forages. We have a really good mix, I think. Again, part of the reason we can stock them as dense as we do. Mix of warm and cool season grasses and a lot of legumes. Really white, red, and crimson clover, some lespedeza as well. And so the herbicide management that we do use on some of our other pastures and what are typically used kind of in our area, controlling those broadleaf weeds, you're going to do that, and end up sacrificing, your beneficial broadleafs, your legumes. So we don't spray, or we haven't yet. I think there's a new herbicide that's supposed to be available this year that's, I think, selectively won't damage, maybe specifically your white clover, whatever. I'm not going to get too much into those specifics, but maybe something we utilize in the future, because we do have some broadleaf weeds. We do clip pastures. Last couple of years we had to clip them once, usually in kind of early to mid-June, and that's it, which again, that's another little cost we didn't figure in our expenses, our fuel and whatnot involved there, equipment cost. But yeah, some of the ways we try to manage the pastures a little better. Okay, and so then we get to selling them. How do we go about doing that? We don't run them through just a regular weekly local auction. We are fortunate in that here in our general area, there is a feeder cattle sale they hold every year just before Thanksgiving, pretty much tailored directly for these type of animals. Selling in truckload lots, calves just like this. They do bring certainly a little more of a premium when you're selling them in groups like that. And through a sale like that, where you have buyers there looking for pretty much those exact animals. If you're a smaller operation that can't put together a full truckload, you can still do what we're doing. Ideally, if you're in that situation, if you've got a neighbor or somebody nearby who's kind of doing the same thing, or you can get to do the same thing, maybe you can put a group together and make a full truckload. Or if not, you can still make money not selling them by the truckload. You may not get quite the premium, but under the right circumstances can still make it work out. But again, we've been fortunate in having that sale. I think it has helped us capture just a little more value.
Tell us a little bit more about maybe some risk management practices or tools that y'all might use or we might use?
Okay, so I'll briefly hit on it. One, simply I would recommend risk management, especially when you're talking about this type of investment. I'm not an expert in all the different options that are out there and available to you. We do use a broker to do so. Definitely a good idea, but not something I feel comfortable even really discussing. I don't understand all the intricacies of what goes into that, but different video for a different channel, but definitely something I would recommend looking into.
So, what are some different strategies or different plans or different types of other stalker operations kind of that compared to us?
Right. So specifically, obviously what we're doing, buying 600-pound animals in the spring, grazing them all year, selling them in the fall. So I guess a few of the big differences, or other routes you can go, buying them at different sizes. I would venture to say that this is probably more towards the high end that people will purchase stalker cattle. You can certainly purchase them a lot smaller. One of the advantages to doing that is you're maybe able to stock them at a lot denser stocking rate. Because a 400-pound animal is not going to consume near as much forage as a 600-pound animal will. And then if you expect they'll still have about that same average daily gain, your total gain over that group may be a little more. So a little, that's one other option that's kind of intrigued me. We've kind of stayed away from it because this has worked relatively well for us. You worry a little more buying them younger like that, possibly, buying them straight off their mama that hadn't been weaned, buying ballers, or is that...
Wait. What's a baller?
So, not talking about LeBron James or anybody like that here, but just like a balling calf. He's crying. He hadn't been weaned. He's just come off his mom. Guess we call them that because you get them home and they're balling for the first several days to a couple of weeks.
So we don't need to sleep. You don't want to put them next to your window, huh?
Right now, in which these calves aren't directly here on our home farm, but we do have neighbors nearby where they are housed. So you don't want your neighbors mad at you either, having balling calves all night. But more risk in those calves, more potential reward though, naturally. So that would be something, I've heard good arguments for buying them smaller than we do. And I'm sure there are people that make that work and make it work really well. If you're probably going to get up into a little higher death loss, which again, we had too high death loss this year anyway, even at the bigger size calves. Probably the other main types of operations, just buying different times of the year or feeding them differently. We're relying almost solely on forages or the grazing of forages. Other operations, depending on their exact setup, maybe they've got smaller area, don't have the acres to graze them on, but they're set up to feed. Maybe they have silage available to them and are set up to feed in that manner, or they're grinding hay, or they have haylage, something like that. They're buying them more this time of year in the fall or winter, feeding them through the winter months because they have that feed available to them. Definitely they can make that work. What works in even one part of the state or certainly one part of the country may not work everywhere else. Buying them at different sizes. You buy them or you're feeding them like that. Some people, they'll run them through a lot quicker. They're really feeding them, pushing them a little harder than we are. They're going to gain a lot more than that 1.15 pounds a day. And so they may turn a group over a lot quicker. Again, we had these for 234 days, and like I said, they may turn a group over in half that time, or even less, and depending on how they're marketing them. And so that can certainly be a way to make it work.
So I guess kind of to wrap this up, what if you had somebody or this group out here that we're talking to today, if they were wanting to get into the stalkering operation, what are some kind of maybe tips or things that you might recommend them think about?
So figure out what kind of what's going to make your operation not necessarily unique, but what you've got to market. And again, really what we have to market is our grass. And so obviously grass is just not very marketable in and of itself, but we can use those animals to turn it into something that is marketable. So if you have, the land area, the pasture ground available, you're kind of doing like we're doing essentially. If you have the facilities, the setup, maybe cheap feed sources of other types available to you, then feeding them in a different manner. Maybe in a little more of a confinement, maybe not total confinement like a feedlot, but that you can make that work. I know people that do both, that they have lots of pasture ground, but at this time of year, grass is going dormant. And so they'll have them, that they also have access to silage, so they'll feed a group through the winter on silage. Some people, we're using essentially perennial pastures. A lot of people may have, some row crop ground that they, sow down a cover crop, wheat, rye, and then can graze them on that, very, kind of in the late winter and utilize that. That's something, we kind of think about. Some areas they graze corn stalks. You're not going to get, I think generally a lot of gain on something like that. It's lower quality forage, but something that in combination with a cover crop. So lots of other options. It's just going to depend on figuring out what resources you have available and how you can put pounds as cheap as possible, keeping that cost of gain down, and turning it into marketable product, which is added pounds on cattle. For our operation again this year, what made it work, what really helped us get to this number was, again, the way we were able to buy them cheaper in spring. Won't be able to rely on that every year by any means. But we obviously expect to keep that 7% death loss at a much lower rate. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but a year ago we had 65 head and didn't lose a single one. So I blame some of that on, when we talk about our veterinary care, we give them what's called a metaphylaxis dose of an antibiotic. So this is when you're taking a group of high-risk animals that aren't necessarily sick, but they're at risk of it because they've just been through a cell borne, treating them all with an antibiotic. This year, through just plain stupidity and bad planning on my part, I didn't have the antibiotic on hand, and so we didn't get to treat all of them. And is it coincidence that we lost 5 head this year, really 4 head to true death loss versus didn't lose a single one last year? I don't know, but you can bet in 21 we will not make that same mistake. We'll be better planned out and ready to go when these calves come in and ready to be treated. But just briefly, some of the things we have done. We encourage you, give us, if you got any questions, because we really just hit the high spots, leave it in the comments. We do read all of them. If you want to message us directly, feel free to do so. On Instagram's probably the best way. Facebook, it would get to us eventually, but we're not very active on our Facebook page. And if you visited it, you probably noticed that. Pretty much we just share these videos, but feel free to ask a question. We'd love to discuss everything in a little more detail with you.
You want to tell them what your handle is on Instagram?
On Instagram it's just Hurricane Creek Farm or Hurricane Creek Farms. You search that, you'll find us. Facebook, it's Hurricane Creek Farms as well. We, as I always ask you, hit the like and subscribe button, share it. We appreciate that. And as always, remind you to eat beef and God bless.